The cantina smelled of smoke and old metal. Dim lights cast long shadows across empty tables. Most beings avoided this place. It was where the broken ones came to drink and forget. Zektar sat in the corner booth, his cybernetic arm clicking softly as he lifted his glass. The metal fingers worked just fine, but they felt cold against the warm liquid. His real arm was buried somewhere on Kethmara, along with too many friends to count. The young journalist slid into the seat across from him. She was Altarian, with the typical blue skin and large eyes of her species. Her recording device sat between them like a small barrier. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me," she said. Her voice was soft, respectful. "I know this isn't easy." Zektar studied her face. So young, she probably wasn't even born when the war started. "You said you wanted to hear about the humans, about what they were like in battle." "Yes, the Coalition archives focus on strategy and outcomes, but I want to understand what it was really like, what it felt like to fight them." Zektar laughed, but there was no humor in it. "What it felt like?" He took another drink. "Fear, that's what it felt like. Pure cold fear." The journalist leaned forward. "The official reports say humans were just another species, primitive compared to Coalition technology. The reports were written by people who never faced them." Zektar's cybernetic fingers drummed against the table. "Tell me, what do you know about human biology?" "Basic facts. They're from a high-gravity world. Omnivores. Short lifespan compared to most Coalition species." "And what did your teachers tell you about their weaknesses?" She consulted her notes. "Fragile bodies. No natural armor or weapons. Poor eyesight and low light. Vulnerable to most toxins." Zektar nodded slowly. "All true?" "Every single fact. And completely useless." The cantina's background noise seemed to fade. Even the other patrons appeared to be listening, though they pretended not to. "You want to know what humans are really like in war? They don't fight like any other species. We had rules, protocols, ways that civilized beings conduct warfare. Humans took our rules and used them against us." The journalist's recording device hummed quietly. "Can you give me an example?" "Kethmara." The word came out like a curse. "Our greatest fortress. We spent 3 years holding it against the Coalition advance. 3 years. The place was a symbol of Vorthak's strength. Unbreakable." Zektar's real hand traced old scars on his neck. "The humans arrived with a small force, maybe 2,000 troops. We had 20,000 defenders plus orbital support. We laughed at them. What happened? They didn't attack the fortress. Not at first. They waited, studied us, learned our routines. Then they did something that still gives me nightmares." The journalist waited, not wanting to break the spell. "They attacked during a radiation storm. You understand? The kind of weather that kills most species in minutes. Our sensors couldn't work. Our communications failed. Even our power systems struggled." Zektar's voice dropped to a whisper. "But humans? They walked through that storm like it was nothing. Their suits were better, yes, but it wasn't just technology. They endured pain that would have killed any of us. I watched human soldiers fighting with radiation burns that covered half their bodies. That's impossible. I thought so too, until I saw it." Zektar stood and walked to the cantina's small window. Outside, ships moved peacefully through space. "They didn't just take the fortress. They made us afraid of our own defenses. Every Vorthak stronghold after that felt like a trap instead of safety." The journalist scribbled notes frantically. "How long did the siege last after they arrived?" 6 days. The recording device captured her sharp intake of breath. 6 days to break a fortress that held for 3 years. "And do you know the worst part?" Zektar returned to his seat. "The human commander who planned that attack? I met him 5 years ago at a trade conference. He grows flowers now." "Flowers? You're saying he changed?" "They all changed. That's what makes them truly terrifying. Not their weapons or their tactics. The fact that they can be monsters in war and gardeners in peace. Most species are what they are. Humans choose what they become." The journalist looked confused. "I don't understand. If they were so effective, why did the war end in peace talks instead of human victory?" Zektar smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. "Because they chose to stop. They could have kept going. Could have destroyed every Coalition world. But they decided the cost was too high. The cost to them, the cost to everyone. To us, to themselves, to the idea of civilization itself. That's when I knew we weren't fighting just another species. We were fighting something that could choose to be better than what survival demanded. The cantina had grown quiet around them. Other patrons, mostly veterans themselves, listened without pretending otherwise now. "There are more stories," Zektar said quietly. "Darker ones, things that happened in the Devil's Nebula. The medic who saved my life while his comrades were killing my squad. But those tales, they change how you see the universe." The journalist's eyes were bright with curiosity and something that might have been fear. "I want to hear them all. Do you?" "Really?" Zektar leaned back in his seat. "Because once I tell you these stories, you can't unknow them. You'll look at every human differently. The ones serving coffee, teaching children, building homes. You'll remember what they're capable of when pushed to the edge." She didn't hesitate. "Yes, people need to understand both sides of the story." Zektar studied her face again. Such determination. Such innocence. Like looking at himself before the war when he thought he understood what conflict meant. "Very well," he said finally. "But understand this. What I'm about to tell you will change how you see your new peaceful allies forever. The humans didn't just fight us. They redefined what fighting meant." He raised his glass in a mock toast. "To humanity. May they never again need to show the universe what they're truly capable of." The journalist raised her own glass, though her hand trembled slightly. "Tell me about Kethmara," she said. "Tell me everything." Zektar's cybernetic fingers clicked against his glass one more time. Then he began to speak, and the cantina filled with the ghost of old fears and older truths. Outside the window, human ships moved alongside coalition vessels in perfect formation, peaceful, cooperative, but Zektar remembered when those same ships had been weapons that turned space itself into a hunting ground. The first story was about to begin. Zektar's eyes grew distant as he began the tale. The cantina seemed to fade around them, replaced by memories of ice and blood. Kethmara was built into a mountain, 3 miles of solid rock between the surface and our main command center. The whole planet was a fortress world, but Kethmara was the crown jewel. We had shields that could stop orbital bombardment, weapons that could hit targets in low orbit, supply tunnels that went down to the planet's core. The journalist watched his face carefully. "It sounds impregnable." That's what we thought. The coalition had been throwing themselves against our defenses for 3 years. Wave after wave of attacks. They lost millions of troops trying to break through. We started to believe we were untouchable. Zektar paused to drink. His cybernetic hand moved with mechanical precision, but she could see the slight tremor in his real fingers. Then the humans came. 2,000 soldiers. No heavy equipment. No siege engines. Just humans and whatever they could carry. Our intelligence officers laughed. Our generals made jokes about easy targets. What was your first impression of them? Small. That's what struck me first. Most coalition species are larger than humans. We Vortax stand 8 feet tall. Even the Altarians are taller than humans, but size didn't matter to them. They moved differently, purposeful, like they already knew something we didn't. The cantina's ambient noise seemed muted, as if the building itself was listening. They set up camp in the worst possible location, right in the storm zone. Kethmara's weather was brutal, constant radiation storms that lasted for days. The electromagnetic interference was so bad that most technology failed. We thought they were fools. Zektar's voice dropped lower. The first attack came during a Class 7 storm. Radiation levels that would kill most species in 15 minutes. Our sensors went blind. Communications failed. Even our life support systems struggled. How could they fight in those conditions? That's what I asked myself, until I saw them moving through the storm like ghosts. Their suits were good, yes, but it wasn't just protection. They endured radiation levels that should have cooked them alive. I watched one human soldier fight for 2 hours with burns covering half his body. The journalist made notes, but her hand was shaking slightly. They didn't attack the main gates. Didn't try to break through our shields? Instead, they went after things we never thought to defend. Power conduits buried under 20 feet of rock. Maintenance tunnels we'd forgotten about. Ventilation systems that seemed too small for any species to use. Zektar stood and paced to the window. The first sign something was wrong came when the lights flickered. Then our communications started failing in patterns. Not random failures, deliberate ones. They were inside our systems, turning our own fortress against us. How is that possible? Humans don't just adapt to their environment. They become part of it. I've seen them squeeze through spaces that would trap any other species. They can survive on less food, less water, less air. And they think, He paused, searching for words. They think like their environment is alive, like they can make friends with radiation and gravity and time itself. The journalist leaned forward. What happened next? The second day, our food supplies started spoiling. All of them. The humans had somehow contaminated our storage areas with bacteria that only affected our food sources. We didn't starve immediately, but the psychological effect was devastating. They were inside our most secure areas, poisoning us slowly. Zektar returned to his seat. The third day they started singing. During the night raids, human voices echoing through our tunnels, combat songs, death songs, songs about home. It was the most terrifying sound I've ever heard. Not because it was loud or threatening, but because it was beautiful. They were making music while they killed us. The recording device captured every word, but the journalist looked pale. The worst part wasn't the attacks themselves. It was how they used our own defenses. Our automated systems started targeting our own troops. Our blast doors locked us in chambers that became tombs. They turned our greatest strength, our security, into our weakness. How many humans did you actually see? Zektar thought for a moment. That's the thing. I'm not sure. Maybe 50? Maybe fewer? They moved like smoke. You'd see movement in the corner of your eye, but when you turned, nothing. They fought like the fortress itself had come alive and decided to kill us. What about their losses? They took casualties. I saw human bodies. But here's what haunted me. Even their dead were dangerous. They booby-trapped their own fallen, used their casualties as psychological weapons. Every human corpse could be hiding an explosive or a data tap or something worse. The journalist's pen had stopped moving. Something worse? Recordings. Audio messages from the dead soldiers. Playing on loop. Talking about their families, their hopes, their fears. Making us see them as people instead of enemies. It was psychological warfare at its finest. Zektar's cybernetic fingers drummed against the table. On the fourth day, our commander tried to negotiate. Sent out a flag of truce. The human response was a single word. Tomorrow. What did that mean? It meant they were giving us 1 day to prepare for the end. Not out of cruelty, but almost out of courtesy, like they were saying goodbye. The cantina had grown completely silent around them. Even the bartender had stopped cleaning glasses. The fifth day, nothing happened. Complete silence. No attacks, no sabotage, no singing. We thought maybe they'd given up or withdrawn. Our sensors showed empty corridors. Our patrols found no traces of human activity. But they were still there. Oh yes, waiting, watching, learning our relaxation patterns. Studying how we behaved when we thought we were safe. That night, some of our troops actually started to feel confident again. Zektar's voice became almost a whisper. The sixth day started with an earthquake. Not natural, artificial. They'd spent 5 days placing charges in exactly the right locations to destabilize the entire mountain. The fortress didn't collapse, but every wall cracked. Every door warped. Every system failed. They brought down the mountain? No, they made it sick, wounded. Our perfect fortress became a broken maze where nothing worked properly. And in that chaos, they came for us, not like soldiers, like something primal. They moved through the damaged corridors like they'd built them themselves. The journalist's recorder hummed in the silence. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, 20,000 Vorthak defenders were dead or captured. Most of my unit surrendered rather than keep fighting. Not because we were cowards, but because continuing seemed pointless. They'd proven that our strongest positions were illusions. How many humans died? Maybe 200. But they achieved something more valuable than a military victory. They made us afraid of our own defenses. Every fortress after Kethmara felt like a trap instead of sanctuary. Zektar finished his drink. The human commander who planned that attack? His name was Colonel Martinez. I met him at a trade conference 5 years ago. He was presenting a paper on sustainable agriculture, growing flowers in hostile environments. The same person? The same person. We talked for hours about soil composition and irrigation techniques. He remembered me, though, asked about my arm. Zektar touched his cybernetic limb. When I told him how I lost it at Kethmara, he got very quiet. Then he said something I'll never forget. The journalist waited. He said, "I'm sorry we had to break so many beautiful things to end that war. I hope the flowers I grow now can balance some of that out." The cantina remained silent for a long moment. That's when I understood. Zektar continued. Humans don't just fight wars. They carry them forever. Every victory costs them something they can never get back. They win by becoming something they don't want to be. He looked at the journalist directly. Do you want to hear about the Devil's Nebula? She nodded, though her face had grown very pale. Then order another drink. That story is darker than this one. The journalist ordered a stronger drink this time. Zektar noticed her hands were steadier, but her eyes held a new wariness. Good. She was beginning to understand. The Devil's Nebula, he began, wasn't its real name. We called it that after what happened there. The official designation was Sector 447 Alpha. Just another patch of space to most people. To us, it became a graveyard. He pulled up a holographic display from his personal device. The nebula appeared between them, a twisted mass of gas and energy that seemed to move with malevolent purpose. Look at it, Zektar said. Beautiful, isn't it? All those colors, like a painting made of stars. But inside that beauty was everything that could kill you in space. Radiation storms that could fry electronics in seconds. Gravity wells that appeared without warning. Magnetic fields that could tear a ship apart. The journalist studied the display. Why fight there at all? Because both sides needed what was hidden inside. A coalition research station. They'd been studying some kind of ancient technology. The humans wanted it. We couldn't let them have it. So we fought in the one place where fighting was almost impossible. Zektar manipulated the display, showing ship movements. The coalition fleet was larger, better armed. Our strategy was simple. Stay in the safer regions and force the humans to come to us through the worst parts of the nebula. Logical. Logical, yes. And completely wrong. His cybernetic fingers traced patterns in the hologram. We thought of the nebula as an obstacle, something to avoid. The humans thought of it as an ally. The display showed the human fleet's approach. Their ships moved in patterns that seemed random, chaotic. They flew directly into the radiation storms, not around them, through them. When our sensors detected them, they were already gone, hidden in the interference. We kept losing track of their positions. Zektar's voice grew distant. I was serving on the command ship Strength of Vorthak. Our captain was a veteran of 30 campaigns. He'd never lost a battle. He kept waiting for the humans to make their real attack, to show themselves so we could fight properly. But they didn't. They became part of the nebula itself. Our first hint came when one of our scout ships just vanished. No distress signal, no debris. One moment it was there, the next it was gone. We assumed it hit a gravity well. The journalist made notes but kept glancing at the holographic nebula. Then it happened again and again, ships disappearing without explanation. Our fleet started pulling back to safer areas, but the humans followed us, always staying in the storms, always hidden in the interference. Zektar adjusted the display to show a specific battle. The first direct engagement came when we thought we had them cornered. 3 human ships against 12 of ours. We had overwhelming firepower. But the humans were using the nebula's gravity wells like slingshots. What do you mean? They would dive toward a gravity source, pick up impossible speed, then use that momentum to strike us before diving back into another storm. Their ships moved faster than our weapons could track. It was like fighting ghosts. The hologram showed the erratic paths of human ships, weaving between deadly hazards. Our weapons were more powerful, but they couldn't hit targets that appeared and disappeared like lightning. The humans struck us with precise hits, then vanished back into the radiation before we could respond. Zektar's real hand clenched into a fist. That's when we realized they weren't trying to destroy our ships. They were hurting us, pushing us toward the most dangerous parts of the nebula, using our own retreat routes against us. They were using the environment as a weapon. Exactly. But it was worse than that. They were sacrificing their own people to do it. I watched human ships fly into radiation levels that should have killed everyone aboard. They kept fighting even when their life support was failing. The journalist looked disturbed. How could they survive that? They couldn't, not all of them. But enough survived to keep fighting. And the ones who died, Zektar paused, remembering. They died singing again. We could hear it over the communication channels. Human voices growing weaker but never stopping their songs. The cantina seemed colder somehow. The worst moment came when we detected what we thought was a derelict human ship. It was drifting in the radiation. No power signatures, no movement. Our captain decided to investigate. Maybe salvage some technology or intelligence. Zektar's cybernetic hand began clicking rhythmically. As we approached, we realized the ship wasn't abandoned. It was a trap. The humans inside were dying from radiation poisoning, but they were still at their stations. Still fighting. They used themselves as bait? Not just bait. As we got closer, that dying ship came alive. Weapons we didn't know it had. Missiles launched from concealed tubes. And as we tried to retreat, more human ships emerged from the radiation storms around us. The holographic display showed the trap closing. Coalition ships surrounded by hazards and enemies. That's when I understood something terrible. The humans weren't just willing to die for victory. They were willing to die slowly, painfully, while still fighting. They turned their own deaths into weapons. The journalist's pen had stopped moving entirely. We lost half our fleet that day. But the worst part wasn't the losses. It was watching human ships continue to fight even after they should have been dead. Crews operating on emergency power, breathing recycled air, slowly cooking in their own radiation but still firing weapons. Zektar stood and walked to the window again. After that battle, our survivors started calling it the Devil's Nebula. Because only devils would fight in such conditions. Only devils would turn hell itself into their hunting ground. How did it end? The humans achieved their objective. They reached the research station and took whatever they came for. But even then, they didn't just leave. They sent us a message. What kind of message? Navigation data, safe routes through the nebula, detailed maps of every hazard we'd encountered. They were showing us how to escape the trap they'd created. The journalist looked confused. Why would they do that? Because they'd gotten what they wanted. The fighting was over, so they helped us survive. Zektar returned to his seat. That's what I mean about humans choosing what to become. They could have left us to die in the nebula. Instead, they showed us the way home. What happened to the human crews who survived? Most of them needed extensive medical treatment. Radiation poisoning, organ damage, psychological trauma. They'd pushed their bodies and minds beyond normal limits, but they recovered. Humans always seem to recover from things that would destroy other species. Zektar manipulated the hologram one more time, showing the current state of the nebula. Today, that research station is a joint coalition human facility. They study ways to make space travel safer. The human admiral who planned the nebula battle, she runs it now. Her name is Admiral Chen. You've met her too? Last year, at a conference on stellar navigation, she was presenting research on how to predict gravitational anomalies, making space safer for everyone. When she saw me, she came over to talk. Zektar smiled, but it was a sad expression. She asked about my prosthetics. When I told her about the nebula, she looked down at her own hands. They're scarred from radiation burns. She said, we were all poisoned by that place, but maybe we can use what we learned to keep others safe. The journalist was quiet for a long moment. She carries it with her too. They all do. Every human who fought in that war carries pieces of it forever, but they choose to carry the lessons, not just the pain. Zektar touched his cybernetic arm, unlike some of us. The holographic nebula continued to swirl between them, beautiful and deadly. The Devil's Nebula taught me something important about humans. They don't just adapt to hostile environments, they make friends with death itself. They dance with it, laugh with it, sing with it, and when the dance is over, they go home and plant gardens. He closed the holographic display. Do you want to hear about the medic? That story is different, more personal. The journalist nodded, though she looked like she was beginning to regret her curiosity. Then prepare yourself, because that story isn't about human tactics or strategy. It's about human souls, and what happens when you realize your enemy has one just like yours. Zektar was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than before. Different. The journalist sensed this story would cut deeper than the others. Zerion Prime, he said, a worthless rock in an unimportant system. But it sat on the supply line between coalition core worlds and the front lines. So we fought for it, died for it, fled into its red soil for 6 months. He touched the scars on his neck absent-mindedly. I was a sergeant then, young and stupid and certain that we were the heroes. The humans were invaders, we were defenders. Simple. The cantina felt smaller somehow, as if the walls were closing in around their conversation. The battle that changed everything happened in what used to be a civilian hospital. Both sides needed the high ground. The building was mostly intact, so it became a fortress. We held the upper floors. The humans held the lower levels. Fighting in a hospital? War doesn't respect peaceful places. The human wounded were on the first floor. Our wounded were on the third. And in between, Zektar paused. In between was hell. The journalist waited, sensing this story needed to emerge at its own pace. I was hit by shrapnel from a human grenade. Nothing immediately fatal, but I was bleeding badly. My squad was pinned down in what used to be a children's ward. There were still pictures on the walls. Little drawings, bright colors. His cybernetic fingers traced invisible patterns on the table. The irony wasn't lost on me. Dying in a place meant to heal, surrounded by children's art about hope and happiness. How badly were you wounded? Bad enough. The shrapnel had hit an artery. I was losing blood fast, getting dizzy. My squad couldn't reach me, there was too much crossfire. I was going to die in that children's ward, watching cartoon animals fade in and out of focus. Zektar's voice became almost a whisper. That's when the human found me. The journalist leaned forward. A human soldier? A medic. Small even for a human. Female. I could see the medical symbols on her uniform, but she was armed. Combat medic, they call them. Healers who fight? What did she do? The most impossible thing I could imagine. She started treating my wounds. Right there in the middle of a firefight. Bullets flying overhead, explosions shaking the building. And she's working on my injuries like we were in a peaceful clinic. The memory seemed to transport Zektar back to that moment. I tried to fight her at first. Thought it was some kind of trick. But I was too weak and she was surprisingly strong. She just kept working, talking to me in a calm voice. What did she say? Medical things mostly. Hold still. This might hurt. You're going to be fine. But she said it in Vorthak. Not perfect, but good enough. She'd learned our language well enough to comfort wounded enemies. The journalist made notes, but her writing was slower now, more careful. While she worked, the fighting continued around us. Her own people were shooting at my people just floors away. But in that moment, in that room with children's drawings, she was just a healer, and I was just someone who needed healing. Zektar's real hand trembled slightly as he reached for his glass. The worst part was when she started crying, not sobbing or wailing, just tears running down her face while she worked. I didn't understand at first. Then I realized she was grieving. For all of us. Human and Vorthak alike. She was sad about the war. She was sad about what the war was doing to everyone. Every wound she treated was a failure of diplomacy. Every death was a waste of potential. But she kept working anyway, kept healing. The cantina's other patrons had long since stopped pretending not to listen. Even the bartender stood motionless, cleaning the same glass over and over. When she finished with my immediate wounds, she should have left, should have gone back to her own people. Instead, she stayed, kept pressure on the worst cuts. Shared her water with me, told me about her home. What did she tell you? She was from a place called Minnesota, Earth. She described snow and lakes and trees that changed colors. She had a daughter about the same age as the children who'd drawn those pictures on the walls. Zektar's voice broke slightly. That's when I understood. She wasn't just treating my wounds. She was treating her own grief. Every patient was a way to fight back against the destruction around us. How long did she stay with you? Hours. The fighting moved to other parts of the building. We could hear it in the distance. Explosions, gunfire, screaming. But our floor became quiet. Just me and her and the children's artwork. The journalist's pen had stopped moving entirely. She told me about her daughter's drawings. How they covered the refrigerator at home, stick figures and hearts and houses with too many windows. She said children always drew too many windows in houses because they wanted to let in as much light as possible. Zektar gestured at the walls around them. There we were in the darkness of war, and she was talking about children wanting more light. It broke something inside me, some certainty I'd carried about who was good and who was evil. What happened when your people found you? She heard them coming. Vorthak voices in the corridor. She could have run, hidden, tried to get back to her own lines. Instead, she sat back against the wall and waited. She let herself be captured. She let herself be judged. When my squad mates came through the door, weapons ready, they found their sergeant alive because of an enemy medic. She didn't try to explain or justify, just pointed to her medical insignia and said one word in Vorthak, healer. The memory seemed to exhaust Zektar. He slumped back in his chair. My squad didn't know what to do. Military protocol said to take her prisoner. But she'd saved my life. Spent hours caring for a wounded enemy while her own people were dying floors away. What did they decide? My squad leader was an old soldier named Gorth, 30 years of service. He looked at me, looked at her, looked at the children's drawings on the walls. Then he did something I've never seen before or since. Zektar's cybernetic hand clicked softly. He saluted her. A full military salute. Then he said, "Go home, healer. This place has enough ghosts." He let her go. He escorted her to a neutral zone 2 blocks away. The fighting had moved past there. She could reach human lines safely. Before she left, she gave me something. The journalist waited. A photograph of her daughter, a little human girl with bright eyes and a gap-toothed smile. On the back, she'd written something in human script. I had it translated later. What did it say? Every person who lives is a victory against the darkness, and that's what she believed. That healing people was how you fight despair. Zektar reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn photograph. The little girl's smile was indeed bright, full of innocent joy. I've carried this for 20 years, through the rest of the war, through recovery, through all the years since. It reminds me that even in our darkest moments, someone is choosing to create light. The journalist stared at the photograph. Do you know what happened to her? I found out years later. She survived the war, went home to Minnesota and her daughter, but she didn't stop being a medic. She started a program to train coalition and human medical personnel together. She's still healing people, still fighting darkness with light. Her name is Dr. Sarah Chen. I met her 3 years ago at a medical conference. She's older now, gray hair, lines around her eyes. But when she smiled, I recognized her immediately. Did she remember you? She remembered the room, the children's drawings. She said she thought about that day often, wondered if I'd survived, if the healing had worked. Zektar carefully returned the photograph to his pocket. She asked if I was angry about the war. What did you tell her? I told her the truth. That anger was too small a word for what the war did to all of us. But that her kindness in that children's ward had saved more than my life. It had saved my ability to believe in goodness. The cantina was completely silent now. Even the background hum of life support seemed muted. Dr. Chen said something that day that I think about often. She said, "We're good at breaking things. We have to be just as good at fixing them." That's humanity in one sentence. They break and heal with equal skill. Zektar finished his drink. That medic taught me that humans don't just choose to be monsters or angels. They choose to be both when necessary. They'll kill you to win a war, then cry while they heal your wounds. That sounds contradictory. It sounds human. They're the only species I know that can hold love and hate in the same heart without going insane. They mourn their enemies while they kill them. They heal their former foes while remembering every scar. The journalist looked at her notes, then at Zektar. One more story? He nodded slowly. The last one. About the peace. About what happened when the killing stopped and the real work began. The real work? Learning to live with what we'd all become. Learning to build something better from the ashes of our old hatreds. Zektar stood to order another round. That story might be the hardest of all, because it's still happening. The journalist waited, knowing that some stories needed silence to breathe before they could be told. The cantina had grown quiet around them, but not empty. Other patrons remained, nursing their drinks and their memories. Zektar noticed how many different species sat together now. Vorthak, human, Altarian, and others. All of them veterans. All of them carrying pieces of the same war. The peace, he said slowly, was harder than the fighting. The journalist looked surprised. How can peace be harder than war? War gives you clear enemies. Peace forces you to face what you've become. Zektar gestured around the cantina. Look at us. Former enemies drinking together. It should be simple, right? The shooting stopped, so we moved on. He shook his head. But the human who saved your life yesterday is the same human who killed your friend last week. How do you process that? How do you shake hands with someone who can look at your scars and remember putting them there? The journalist followed his gaze around the room. She began to notice the subtle tensions, the way certain groups sat apart, the careful politeness, the unspoken boundaries. The armistice was signed on a neutral station much like this one. I was there representing what was left of my unit. The humans sent their delegation too. We sat across from each other at a conference table, trying to pretend we were diplomats instead of killers. Zektar's cybernetic fingers drummed against his glass. The hardest part wasn't negotiating terms. It was looking at their faces, really seeing them for the first time as individuals instead of enemy soldiers. What did you see? Exhaustion. The same bone-deep tiredness we all carried. But also something else, relief. They were as tired of killing as we were of dying. He paused. And fear. They were afraid of what came next. The humans were afraid. Terrified. They'd spent years becoming perfect weapons. Now they had to become people again, citizens, neighbors. They had to go home and explain to their families what they'd done, what they'd become. The journalist made notes, but more slowly. This story felt different from the others. The signing ceremony was supposed to be formal, dignified. But something happened that nobody expected. Zektar smiled slightly. One of the human delegates started crying. Not quietly, sobbing. Shaking with grief. What triggered it? A moment of recognition. He looked across the table and saw a Vorthak delegate he'd fought against. Face to face instead of through weapon sights, and he realized that every enemy he'd killed had been someone's son, daughter, parent, friend. Zektar's voice became softer. The Vorthak delegate, it was Commander Thekval, he got up from his chair. We thought he was going to attack the human. Instead, he walked around the table and put his hand on the human's shoulder. Just stood there while the human cried. What did he say? Nothing. That was the power of it. No words could bridge what had happened between us. But that simple gesture of recognition, of shared grief, it was the real armistice. The papers we signed later were just making it official. The cantina's ambient noise seemed different now, less like isolated groups and more like a community processing shared trauma. The first year of peace was chaos. Not violent chaos, emotional chaos. Nobody knew how to act. There were humans and coalition species living on the same worlds, working in the same facilities but unable to trust each other. How did people cope? Badly at first. There were incidents. Old hatreds flaring up. Veterans on both sides struggling with survivors' guilt and rage and confusion. Some people couldn't handle the transition. We lost more than a few to suicide in those early months. The journalist stopped writing. I didn't know that. It's not in the official histories. Both sides preferred to focus on the success stories. But the truth is, peace almost failed in the first year. We came close to returning to war several times. Zektar stood and walked to the cantina's memorial wall. Names covered the surface, beings who had died in various conflicts. The turning point came during the reconstruction of Zarian Prime, the hospital. Where I met Dr. Chen had been completely destroyed in the final battle. Both sides agreed to rebuild it together as a symbol of cooperation. How did that work? Terribly at first. Human and Vorthak construction crews working side by side but barely speaking. Every decision became an argument. Whose architectural style to use? What materials to employ? Even what color to paint the walls? Zektar traced a name on the memorial wall with his finger. Then one of the human workers found something in the rubble. A piece of debris from the children's ward, one of those drawings I told you about. Somehow it had survived. What was the drawing of? A house. Like Dr. Chen had described. Too many windows. Drawn by a Vorthak child before the war started. The human worker brought it to the construction site and asked what we should do with it. The journalist waited, sensing the importance of this moment. Nobody knew what to say. It was just a piece of paper with crayon marks, but it represented everything we'd destroyed and everything we were trying to rebuild. One of the Vorthak workers suggested framing it. A human suggested making copies for everyone. Zektar returned to his seat. Instead, we did something better. We used it as inspiration. The new hospital was designed to let in as much light as possible. Windows everywhere, skylights, glass corridors. A building that practically glowed. And that helped people work together. Working towards something beautiful instead of just functional gave us common ground. We weren't just humans and Vorthak anymore. We were people trying to create something that honored both our losses and our hopes. The cantina felt warmer somehow, as if the story was generating actual heat. The reconstruction project became a model for other cooperation efforts. Mixed crews, shared goals, focus on creation instead of past destruction. It wasn't perfect. There were still tensions, still difficulties. But it was progressing. What about the veterans? How did they adjust? Some better than others. The ones who found new purposes adapted faster. Former soldiers becoming teachers, engineers, artists, people who could channel their intensity into building instead of destroying. Zektar gestured around the cantina. Places like this helped too. Neutral ground where former enemies could meet as equals. Share stories. Process trauma together. Realize that everyone had scars. Is that why you agreed to tell me these stories? Partly, but also because I think it's important for your generation to understand what peace actually costs. It's not the absence of conflict. It's the daily choice to be better than our worst impulses. The journalist looked at her notes. Pages of testimony about human capabilities, human choices, human contradictions. What do you want people to know about humans? Sektar considered the question carefully. That they're dangerous. Not just because they're good at fighting, but because they're good at changing. They can become whatever the situation demands. Warriors, healers, builders, destroyers, and that's frightening. It's terrifying and wonderful at the same time. They could choose to become conquerors tomorrow. They have the capability, but they choose not to. Every day, millions of humans wake up and choose to be better than their potential for destruction. The journalist closed her notebook. One last question. Do you trust them? I trust them to be exactly what they choose to be in any given moment. If they choose to be my friend, they'll be the most loyal friend imaginable. If they choose to be my enemy, he touched his cybernetic arm. Well, you've heard those stories. Sektar raised his glass and the gesture rippled through the cantina. Other patrons, human and non-human alike, raised their drinks as well. To humanity, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. May they never again need to show the universe what they're truly capable of. And may we never forget that they choose every day not to. The toast was echoed throughout the cantina. Different voices, different languages, but the same sentiment. As the evening wound down, the journalist packed up her equipment. Thank you, she said, for all of it. For the truth. The truth isn't always comfortable, but it's necessary. Sektar stood to leave. What will you do with these stories? Share them. Help people understand that peace isn't an accident. It's a choice we make every day. Sektar nodded approval. Then maybe some good will come from all that darkness. As he walked toward the exit, he paused at a table where a human veteran sat alone. The man looked up, recognized Sektar despite the years, and nodded slightly. Sektar nodded back. No words were exchanged. None were needed. They were former enemies who had chosen to become something better. Veterans of a war that had ended not with victory or defeat, but with understanding. The journalist watched this interaction, then looked around the cantina one more time. She saw former enemies sharing drinks, swapping stories, caring for each other's wounds, literal and metaphorical. This was humanity's greatest victory, she realized. Not the battles they'd won, but the peace they'd chosen to build afterward. The daily decision to be better than their capacity for destruction. Outside the cantina, human and coalition ships moved together through space in perfect formation, peaceful, cooperative, choosing, every day to build instead of destroy. The war was over. The work of peace would never end, and that perhaps was exactly as it should be.